Prompt 3 reads, reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking, and what was the outcome? This prompt is difficult to answer because most high schoolers haven't participated in the types of iconoclastic protests that lend themselves to an awe-inspiring response, where you were fighting against social ills and making a huge difference in the world. A more tenable alternative here would be to discuss a time that you went against social norms, whether it was becoming friends with somebody who was seen as the weird kid, or like an outcast, or maybe you were proudly showing off a geeky passion. If you ever participated in a situation in tandem with adults that found some success, like blogging or starting a tutoring organization or participating in political campaigns, you can discuss your experiences as a young person without a college degree in professional circles. You want to really walk a line here, though, and one of the challenges of this essay is that you want to describe these things and experiences without sounding morally superior. You don't want to paint yourself as the only person in the world who goes against this convention, or how could everyone else be so blind to just go with this? You don't want to show yourself as better than your peers because you pushed back against this. It's about the process and the act of pushing back against something and seeing what you learned from it. Another way to go about this prompt is to discuss a time when you noticed a need for change. And so, for example, maybe you wondered why medical records were handwritten at your doctor's office, or why a doctor's visit was long and awkward, and challenged the norm by brainstorming an electronic recording smartphone app or a telemedicine system. In a similar way, maybe you led a fundraiser and recognized that advertising on social media would be more effective than the traditional use of printed flyers. Or you could write something on those lines, focusing on the action or experience that you had that caused you to recognize the need for change and to follow with your actions and the resulting outcome. As a whole, this prompt lends itself to reflective writing and, more specifically, talking the reader through your internal process. And in many cases, the exploration of your thought processes and decision-making is more important than whatever the actual outcome or concept in question is. In short, this essay is more about thinking and rumination and inquisition, and being curious about making change and asking questions where people aren't already. And so a good brainstorming exercise for this kind of essay would be to write your problem on a sheet of paper and then develop various solutions to the problem, including a brief reason or justification. And the more you go, the deeper you go, the more thorough you are in justifying and explaining your solutions in the essay, the more compelling your response will be. Of course, you want to make sure that you're focusing on yourself and your own experiences. This is an essay about you. It's not an essay about a problem. It's an essay about you solving a problem. So make sure that you justify what you're doing, but the focus should always be on you. One consultant with CollegeVine wrote her essay on this topic, and about the experience of growing up with a unique name and feeling pressured to be different from other people. She would sacrifice her own wishes and preferences just to make unconventional choices. And so finally she challenged the idea of being different, which is really meta if you think about it. And she wanted to discover her real interests, and so she defied what she'd always expected of herself, especially. And so here's an excerpt. Whenever someone hears my name for the first time, they comment, "Wow, Jensina is such a cool name. She must be pretty cool. She must be from somewhere exotic. She must be musical and artsy." When I was little, these sentiments felt more like commands than assumptions. I thought I had to be the most unique child of all time, which was a daunting task, but I tried. I was the only kid in the second grade to color the sun red. During snack time, we would choose between apple juice and grape juice, and even though I liked apple juice more, if everyone else was choosing apple, I had to have grape. This was how I lived my life, and it was exhausting. After 8th grade, I moved to Georgia. I soon discovered that my freshman year would be my new high school's inaugural year. And since there were students coming in from 5 different schools, there was no real sense of normal. I panicked. If there was no normal, how could I be unique? I realized I'd spent so much energy going against the grain that I had no idea what my true interests were. It was time to find out. I joined the basketball team, performed in school musicals, and enrolled in chorus, all of which were firsts for me. I did whatever I thought would make me happy, and it paid off. I was no longer socially awkward. In fact, because I was involved in so many unrelated activities, I was socially flexible. I'd finally become my own person. Now, this prompt is asking for going against what people expect of you or social convention. And this person talks about how they'd always done that. And so they wanted to try being their own person rather than being different for the sake of being different. And so we see that they are discovering themselves over the course of the essay. Obviously, this has been shortened, and so a line like, "I was no longer socially awkward," is pretty abrupt and pretty, declarative. It describes a situation without giving any details or ideas about where that came from. But again, this is just a shortened, edited excerpt, and so building to something like that is going to make for a very compelling essay. There are a couple questions in the chat, so before I move on to prompt number 4, I want to address some of those. Someone said, "You earlier said that admissions officers tend to lean progressive. Will it hurt me if I mention something I don't like about progressiveness or liberalism?" So this is a great question. And so I think that it's definitely possible for you to write about something that you don't like within the progressive movement or the liberal movement or even just more liberal politics. That's definitely possible. I'm not saying you shouldn't, and I'm not saying you should deny, things about who you are. However, when readers are looking at your essays, they're trying to establish whether you'd be a good fit for the school. And they care a lot about intellectual diversity and people coming from different backgrounds with different ideas and perspectives. But they also want to make sure that you align with the mission of the university. So if you're coming out with things like that are really counter to what the school stands for or some key tenets of what is going on there, then it's probably something to keep to yourself. Keep in mind that you want to be emphasizing the things that you and schools have in common and not things that will drive a wedge between you. And you shouldn't be wanting to apply to schools that are incredibly different from you. You want to apply to schools where you would be able to grow and thrive and be challenged, yes, but not be at odds at all times. So an example I always give is it's not a good idea to write an essay about the importance of religion in education if you're applying to a lot of secular schools. And it's not a good idea to write about the importance of removing education from religion and religion from education if you're applying to a lot of religious schools. You want to make sure that you are addressing something that is going to help you align with the school. There's another question here. Are there any topics you would 100% not recommend writing an essay about? Yes, there are a few things that are immediate no-nos, red flags left and right. And that's writing about any kind of bigotry that that's not true. I would strongly recommend that you don't write about being a bigot. You don't express any opinions that are discriminatory, sexist, racist, homophobic, or just defaming a group of people for any reason. That said, there are a couple other topics that are super overdone, winning the big sports game, or having a sick grandparent are incredibly overdone topics. And you can still write about them, but it takes a lot to stand out when you're writing about a topic like that. The death of a pet is another one that officers will see a lot. So you want to avoid writing about those things if you can't do it in a unique way. That said, if you do have a unique way to talk about it, then by all means, share that. It is all part of, your own journey, your story. If it's very important to you, let it out. Somebody else has asked here, does there have to be a single life-altering event to show growth and make a good essay? If not, can you talk about an alternative structure to make a good essay? And so this is something that I mentioned earlier. The answer is no, it doesn't have to be a single moment. It helps if you have discrete moment or moments, because you have to tell stories and anecdotes to have really compelling essays for the most part. But it doesn't have to be about a single moment. As I said, my Common App essay was about 4 different moments. The first one when I was 3 years old, one when I was 7, one when I was 14, and one when I was 17. And so I then tied them all together. They were thematically very close together, even though they were temporally separated. And so by stitching together that common thread, I was able to make that a strong essay, make that one work in my favor, even though it talked about 4 really distinct time points. Someone asked, I have this feeling I should avoid talking about things that aren't familiar to American culture in order to let admissions officers really understand what I'm talking about. There's some really cool stuff in my culture, but I'm not sure how to go about talking about them. Should I explain everything along the way? These are great questions, and this is something that a lot of international students especially struggle with. You should aim to explain things that you think wouldn't be familiar to an admissions officer, regardless of whether that's something to do with your culture, something really niche as one of your activities. Like if you're really into robotics and you start using robotics jargon and talking about things that a layman or somebody who's not involved with robotics wouldn't understand, then you're going to lose the reader. And you want them to be on your team. They want you to empathize. You want them to empathize with you. And so if there's something that they wouldn't understand, you should explain it. And if you can't explain it concisely, to the point that, your entire essay is just explaining stuff and it stops being about you and more about explaining what your cultural touchstones are, then it loses its impact. So I'm not going to say don't write about it about your culture if that's the important thing that you want to address. But make sure that you are focusing the essay on you and not losing it to explanation. And make sure that you are not letting a reader get lost and not have any idea what's going on. Don't assume that your readers know what you're talking about, especially if it's something that you think wouldn't be familiar to a typical American audience. Does the moment we talk about have to show growth? What if that specific moment left us confused rather than having learned something? That's totally fair. You can 100% write about times that confused you. Often the biggest realizations and the biggest growth comes from times when you're confused, because it forces you to examine the world around you a little more closely. But you have to make sure that you talk about where that confusion led you, right? So you have to talk about not just what happened that confused you, why it sort of disillusioned you or disabused you of some notion about the world, but then what you did to figure out and reorient and recenter yourself, and how you grew from that. So the moment can be the thing that puts you in flux, but then there has to be a sort of stabilization and sort of a growth trajectory that comes out of it, even if that moment wasn't necessarily the thing that was the growth itself. And then there's one last question I want to address before moving on. Essays about weird or absurd or niche things are the ones that stand out the most. Generally, that's true. The more unique the topic, or more unique doesn't really make sense because something's either unique or it isn't. But the more personalized the topic, the easier it is to write something that stands out. However, you still have to focus on doing it well and communicating with a voice that is relatable, understandable, accessible, interesting, and that an admissions officer would want on their campus. As I said before, writing about super niche things only gets you so far. If you write a non-interesting essay, then it's still not going to resonate and it's still not going to help you get over into the admitted pile. So you have to make sure that you're still writing a compelling essay and not just letting the topic do all the heavy lifting.